Having been involved in the merino industry, trying things differently, etc., and looked at innovation, including adoption curves in electronic industry and stuff, I think when you're talking about paradigm change, you can't force it, and you just got to let it grow organically, and then it starts to get a bit of momentum. And I think we're just in the momentum stage now, but I don't think it's something you can force, and that's really why I wrote the book, because it was all these guys here today and others, their example and the before and after stories. Some of those slides I showed, they're very powerful, and I think that's, you let that filter down, but you certainly can't force it.
Thank you. And I think we've got a whole lot of stories to be told and by our young people in farming, and that's a little bit why we do these podcasts. So yeah, that's another ad for the NutriSoil podcasts on interviewing some of our whole range of farmers, but there's quite a few young farmers on there as well. So the next one is, as a trainer in agriculture, why are many of our universities going down the wrong track in training future ag students? It said the questions for Charles, it's just that these questions were coming out while Charlie was doing his talk. So the first few might be for you. So how can we change this?
I think it's the same answer as the previous one. We've got a ruling paradigm which starts at government and filters the whole way down, and is predicated on industrial agriculture. And now we've had issues like the Department of Agriculture extension agents have been gutted. Okay, some of them might have been involved in the chemical industry, but if you think about pre-Second World War, that there was a great knowledge of soil science then before the industrial world came in, and some of that had filtered on. So they've all gone, and they've been replaced by the product salesmen for the big, I won't mention the names, but the big rural merchandise companies. And then the policy that stems from government filters down to the universities, and then having been to a couple and watched the process, you've got researchers publishing or perish syndrome, and that's all predicated on industrial ag. And if you start throwing something around like these radical people up here talk about, you won't get past first base. So there's a whole cultural paradigm thing, and that's why I preach an underground insurgency. The change won't come from the big end of town or the establishment. It's got to come from us and interlinking with the urban people. Now, having said that, we've got guys like Mark and others now that are working into the system, not undermining it, but coming in that way. And there's some other really good researchers scattered through the country who are a minority. But so maybe I'm not fully answering it. I think it could be two-pronged, but in the meantime, let's get on with it, is my answer.
Could I say today, I think today's presentations, I've been to hundreds and hundreds, I think today's presentations have been the best individually and collectively I've heard in a few years. So well done to everyone. But this business of getting governments and ag departments and ag scientists turned round to adopt regenerative agriculture as the norm, I put a policy paper to the Prime Minister about 2 months ago, and the fundamental aim of it was to have all state and territory governments, federal government, to agree to a national objective to restore and maintain the health of the Australian agricultural landscape. Restore it, get it up there, maintain it there. Then we went on to say, well, how do you do that? Well, the first thing you've got to do is to recognise that the importance of your plants, your water and your soil. And to manage them in an integrated way for all the reasons you've heard today. So the second part of the policy is to get our plant, soil and water declared as key national strategic assets, to be managed as national strategic assets and to be managed in an integrated way, because that is the problem. If you mess up one, the other two fail. The third then is to say, well, who's managing 60% of the continent in agricultural assets? It's 120,000 farmers. And they're managing that asset on behalf of 24 million urban Australians who don't know and don't care, roughly speaking. So the next part of the plot is to say, well, our farmers are doing that on behalf of all of we urbanites. So firstly, let's pay them a fair price for their food. But secondly, to reward them and support them when they want to carry out all these regeneration processes that you've been hearing about today, with the trees on the ridges or fixing the riparian zones, rehydrating the wetlands. The next thing is to say then is, well, how do we get the public on side? Because the rural-urban divide has increased and increased. Many ways to do that, but one that I think would work very well is if we put a vegetable garden in every primary and junior high school in the country, but with a mandated syllabus, so that by the time every child reaches the age of 16, they will have a very good understanding, not just how to grow the tomato and eat it, but what makes the tomato grow in the first place. And I have absolutely no doubt we will change the whole public paradigm once we get 16-year-olds well educated in that. And the final one, I think, was to look at science. We've got a lot of good science. It's all over the place. We've got to do a stock take of our science knowledge, look at the shortfalls. The two critical scientific shortfalls relating to agriculture at the present time is that we still don't have a means of measuring soil carbon, broad acre, quickly, accurately and cheaply. And until we get that measurement system, whether it's satellite to ground sensors with an algorithm or something in between, we're going to have all this problem about, what works and doesn't work. But once we do it, and we can demonstrate that we've been losing soil carbon for 150 years, except in certain places, once we can demonstrate that we can then sequester as much CO2 as we're putting up there, which is about 600 million tonnes a year, if we just sequestered 1.5 tonnes on the 450 million hectares of landscape that are currently managed by agriculture, we would neutralise all our CO2 emissions in one hit and finish all this stupid argument on coal-fired power stations and so on. So they're the policy parameters. And the final bit is the evidence base. Well, our little Soils for Life program, of which a lot of these very good people you see in front are members of that program, or original members of that program. We need the long-term research base. And I believe that research base in large part should be farmers who understand what they're on about and whose performance is measured in economic, productivity, social and environmental terms, which we call the natural capital value of a property. And until the banks and everybody else goes to the natural capital value rather than just economic value, we're in strife. So the soils-based program provides the long-term research base. The policy paper's up there. Yeah, I can promise you here and now, if the government doesn't respond positively in, say, 2 months' time, then you're going to see a very angry soil advocate going public, and we'll pull in every bit of firepower we can get. I don't care where it comes from, because this is so important. Sorry to take so long, but I did want you to know things are happening in those arenas. Thank you.
Thank you.
The answer is really consumer driven, and that's what we've got to look at, and it is happening. And I could just draw a little a situation that I was involved with not long ago. My wife turned 60 and she wanted to go to Paris, so I thought, well, there's a good chance to get a tax deduction. And so, and anyway, one thing led to another, and I ended up talking to a group called Kering, who are a multi-billion-dollar company, and they own all the high fashion shops around the world, Gucci and Prado and about a dozen more. But they were very interested in what I had to present, which was similar to today, and that was about regenerative farming, and they're interested because their consumers, millions of them, are interested in ethical and ecological, those two words, and that's the area where we are now in the box seat. Regenerative farming is right there, and they wanted to know more about that. They actually came and visited us 6 months later in our area. I got 12 producers together in Uralla and talked about how we could do this with our wool and also the leather, and they want to be part of the Australian scene and be part of this program. So That's the sort of thing that's happening. So the answer to me is in the consumer, irrespective of governments. Governments are on the sideline with this. It's us, and that's how it's going to happen.
Look, this is sort of critical. It is actually us, it is the community, it is us voting with our dollars. But the real issue, the thing that's already turning it around, is what we talked about before, the nutritional integrity and the health value of the food we eat. And the minute that people start getting aware just really what they're eating and how that's compromised, the demand for healthy food, the danger is that we can't supply it. So that's another problem. So that driver, that demand driver for nutritional integrity in food, knowing how it was grown, where it was grown, was it grown naturally in soil. The other thing about change, and Charles has done a PhD on this, and it's pretty fundamental. See, we don't need to change everybody. Okay, we need to change about 12% because that's a tipping point. And if we can get basically 12% of people switched on, voting with their dollars, buying there, then it drags the rest of the system with it. And so really it's not such a big hurdle to go because there are basically, a couple of percentage of farmers and people totally engaged. But if we look at all the farmers around Australia who've actually already invested big money in learning and doing courses and being prepared in this area, it's very close to that 12%. So it's just as Michael said, once they have actually a fair reward, they can see the economic viability, they can see it turning, we will be at that 12-15% very quickly. So this change will come, Tim's right, it will come from the community, from the grassroots, from farmers, and these demand drivers like the nutritional integrity health issue.
So that's question 2. It's good. So I'm going to fire about 3 or 4 questions together around glyphosate, and then we'll come back to, I just thought I'd put them all together. So it's, what arguments would you use to combat the industrial ag scare tactic that we need glyphosate to feed the world? And can you suggest alternatives to glyphosate for a broadacre farming system in the transition stage to regenerative ag? Are the other herbicides just as dangerous as Roundup to our health? And with the concern of Roundup, can the same concern be applied to atrazine as a known hormone disruptor with an increase? So the original one was about can we grow food without it?
The recent FAO, Food and Agriculture Organisation, stats from the United Nations show that 70% of the world's food comes off 5-acre farms and less. And most of them are grown on biological processes and a lot more diversity than a monocultural industrial thing. Most of the people growing it are women on those farms. Disempower women because it's usually a patriarchal society. And then the other side of that stat is that we waste about 30% of the food that is grown anyway for a variety of reasons. So the proof you put around by the big end of town is that we need them. If you want to analyse what happens with GM, corn, soil, all that sort of stuff, very, very little of it goes directly into straight out commodity food for people. It goes into feedlots or derivatives. So I don't think we want to have... put that one to bed would be my feeling. And there's a lot more capacity to grow more feed through good biological processes. But
well, it's really shame that it's come to this, because it's, glyphosate is a tool, and if it would have been respected and used properly, has been a very good tool. But what the problem is here is, because we burned out our microbe in our soil, when glyphosate was first released, and that was probably the early 60s or late 50s, I'm not really too sure, somewhere around there. The testing of glyphosate, that it had no residual, after a certain period of time, 36 hours, 24 hours, what it was being, and on all different rates. So I thought it was great, but back then we had high microbe levels in our soil. So we fast forward to right now and we've burnt everything out to Western Australia where below 1%, high acidic levels. And glyphosate's getting used at a rate of, a fallow paddock that wasn't put in last year to just gone in crop now has had up to 15 litres of glyphosate on it before the crop's been put in the ground. We all transitioned from 5 litre bottles of glyphosate to 20s to 110s, and now thousands are common, and you can't get enough thousands on a road train to support your farm. So it's just ridiculous, really. So I think, yeah, we definitely can grow without glyphosate. I do. A large proportion of my farm does not have glyphosate on. That's my oldest generation biological farm. And the way we do that is actually with the perennial grasses. It's, not having bare ground there. If you can have a perennial grass phase, we put in 6,000 hectares dry this year. We didn't get rain to the 25th of May, so we were 99% finished our cropping program. We had 6,000 hectares dry from last year's really bad drought year we had. We grew our crop on 75 mil of rain last year, so things were really dry. And all that program went in with no glyphosate. And my crop's coming up now. It rained 25th of May. We're looking at it and thinking the chemical companies are straight on the blower saying post-emergent chemicals are going to be short. Put your order in, so everyone puts a bit of order in, I put an order in, probably $100,000, which is not a lot of money in the scheme of things for the size programs out there. And Di and I are driving around these crops now and we can't find any weeds at all. They're as clean as a whistle. They're all up, looking really good. And that's to do with the perennial grass phase. So you definitely can get towards doing that, so you're using less and less and less. If I have to use any glyphosate, listen, don't treat it as we just turn off glyphosate, but we've just got to use it sparingly. If we add microbia to the soil and build up our soil biome, the detoxifying effects of that microbe will detoxify any glyphosate levels if we use it in low rates, and we haven't got a problem. As we said, we're testing all our produce and can't find any glyphosate residues at all, even though we might have used a small amount of glyphosate in that year of production, because we've got such high microbe levels, the detoxification process is happening. So I think what we've got to do is aim on using it really sparingly, increasing our soil microbe, increasing our perennial plants, cover cropping, whatever you want to do, and you'll find you start and just end up not using it. So I've used this year, so far no glyphosate, for a 32,000 acre program.
There was just one more part to the question that was, are the other herbicides just as dangerous as Roundup? And there was a question about atrazine. Is that
absolutely?
Yeah.
There's certain herbicides you can give up. I don't use atrazine. I don't use diaron. I totally banned SU chemicals. All those things you can go without. You can actually have other things to actually substitute for. And what you'll find is some of the chemicals that do the most amount of damage are the cheap ones, and everyone uses heaps of it. So you can go and use a sulfurea or something for cents per hectare, and big heaps will go on. And sometimes in this system you'll use a far more expensive chemical with a far lesser carryover effect on your soil, and you're better off doing that. It's far more economical to do that, because in the long term you get a far better result. So yeah, there is certain chemicals which you look at. Another one I'm not too sure, can't quite remember what its actual active is a product called Lontril. I don't use a lot of that because it's carryover effect. You look in and see which ones have huge carryover effects, and you just try and weed them out of your system.
So for Walter, I've got, are you saying that most of the availability of minerals is a mechanical process rather than a molecular, i.e. the positive and negative attractions in the molecules?
Look, what I'm saying, most of it is a biological process. There's a question of availability. So basically, as we said, as we make those surfaces available physically, but then it's basically the biological activity on those surfaces, both to fix, to solubilize, to access, to take up, and to cycle those nutrients. And they're all biologically driven, all dependent on that carbon and that biological life. So one, it's the physical availability, the fact that there are surfaces exposed, and then the microbial process. Of course, charges in the soil have a profound effect, not so much on not making them available, because the fungi can take them up from those charges, but certainly to preventing those nutrients leaching from the soil, because whatever's not held on the soil surfaces and these charges risk leaching out in the soil solution, excess drainage. So nature's evolved this exquisite system of basically having these nutrients available on surfaces, on ionic charges, so that they can be made available microbially. And that's really, as we said, 80% of the biofertility of soils. So it's not how many nutrients in your soil, it's their availability and their cycling that really governs productivity.
It would be good to know what plant types and practices that restrict or deplete mycorrhizal fungi that increases the liquid carbon pathway. The other one is, what are the best in the paddock changes we can make to generate a more balanced fungi-bacterial balanced soil on the road to regeneration?
Look, basically it's a critical issue. It's a case of this, as we sort of said, the soil microbial root interface, how healthy it is. We talked about the 25,000 kilometres of fungal hyphae per cubic metre, up to, but obviously a lot of the soils don't have anything like that. Under agricultural, most of our soils have got spores and what have you, but very, very little of that interface. So really the whole key is, how do we stimulate, how do we create conditions in that soil conducive to those mycorrhizal interfaces? So yeah, what switches them on, what switches them off, and how do we give them the optimal condition? And that's that whole realm of microbial ecology. And this is where, in a sense, biostimulants, without naming any products, worm juices and different plant extracts and different land management techniques have a profound positive effect. And of course, this is where, as we talked about, the various oxidative process, excessive fertilization, excessive cultivation, biocides, but also the bare fallowing, where we're literally starving them, is switching all these organisms off. Okay, so it's that balance. Now, as with all ecology, there's no simple page 53 of a textbook that we're going to read out to you and say, this is what you've got to do, because each situation, it's really a matter of saying, okay, what's going on in this soil? What's limiting these fungi in this soil? What are your management practices that might be contributing to that limitation? First of all, how do we get our hoof off her throat to let those fungal processes perform well again? And then, can we use different stimulants and what have you to help that? Different cover crops, different successional planting, all these different variables. But it is one of those things where really you are needing to, work as groups and then say, these processes are being very effective in this region, in this situation, or otherwise have people out there mentoring and giving that advice. But you'll get a lot of that just from practical experience, and of course all the regenerative farmers are building more and more knowledge in their area on those sort of processes.
The only thing I'd like to add to that is just that allowing nature to have a crack at it. Sometimes we like to do too much, and certainly we do a bit of cover cropping at times, mainly for fodder purposes, particularly after last year was a really nasty dry one. There wasn't enough bulk created in most places of the farm, so we're trying to assist that along. But I think if we were trying to put something in all the time, we wouldn't be letting nature show where it was at and allowing that natural succession of plants to come. And as someone spoke earlier about the natural seeds that are in the soil, just waiting for those right environmental conditions. So if we're out there dictating all the time, we really haven't got a clue of where that soil is at. And nature will sort it out pretty nicely if we just allow it to. And sometimes, you might not be quite where you'd like to be, might not be as many plants as you'd like on a particular paddock, but then the next year it might be better along again with some new ones that you hadn't seen in that paddock before. So I think, trying not to drive it too much and allow nature to be the director a fair bit of the time.
Keep it very simple is a good starting spot. If you can remember the 3 phases of the grasses, learn how to keep your grasses in phase 2, and nature will take its course. Don't let it get too complicated. Keep it in phase 2.
My comment on this is something which I think is quite lacking in our knowledge, and I mentioned in my talk about Professor Walt Whaley when he was trying to introduce the idea that now native pastures were actually of value. So I'd like to ask everyone here to put their hand up if they could tell us if they think they know what a good water cycle looks like. How do you understand? How would you be able to read the land to know what a good water cycle looks like?
David knows.
There's not many. There's a few, yeah. So
Less runoff.
yeah, runoff is part of it. But my point here is that we haven't learnt how to read the land. And as managers, you know, like it's vital. My father taught me, you know, the basics of keeping a hollow tree to keep the possums or whatever in, or the sugar gliders, the value of that, the value of having regeneration coming, the value of cap soil, you know, or the poor value of it. You know, the fact is that having organic matter is obviously a big part of reading that landscape. And then you read into the mineral cycle. How can you tell that? This is something that's missing, and this is the educational thing which I've been trying to push. And maybe it's up to the farmers to teach the next generation, but there's a big link missing here, and we need to address it, because how is the next generation going to learn how to read the land, how to understand about all the stuff that we're talking about today? And so this is why education is such a vital part of our society, you know, and not regulation. I say it again.
I think the other thing is to understand that the factory farming approach or industrial agriculture makes people do things. And there's this culture in agriculture, if you're not flat out working 55 or 80 hours a week, you're not having a go and you're not fed income. And I think that's a cultural thing that needs to be overcome too. That, and certainly through our study, some of the other information is regenerative farmers work less hours a week. And I think to stop doing things and to stop feel like you have to do things is a big thing, and let nature do the things for you while you do other things.
A vision in business is great, but being nimble and able to change to take advantage is something I've found extremely helpful. So many farmers get stuck in a paradigm with the what they do instead of why they do it. And I think that's been spoken about today. Bloody great speakers, such a great day. There we go. I didn't swear, I read it. So on to, there's a couple of questions from people around NutriSoil and when to put it on. And we're happy to answer those questions direct. You know, we're 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I'm just trying to skip through a few. Question Tim Wright, however, happy for anyone else's input, right? Sorry. With small paddocks, 4 to 5 hectares, how is water access allowed for animals? Does it mean water troughs are shared everywhere? For your 300 paddocks, how did you allow access to water?
Our property is well watered, or was. I mean, it's still fairly good today, but with lots of creeks and spring-fed dams. So that is a bonus, but most of our dams have been fenced off. And I still use them as a backup, but it's all reticulation. And so as far as the smaller paddocks go, I just work on a cross, like 4 paddocks to one water trough, and I find that's adequate. And that's not putting too much pressure around the water point, then I move on. To me, when you get down to that sort of area, it's not much to put an extra couple of hundred metres of poly pipe to put another trough in. It's well worth that money. And you can claim on it, it's a tax deduction. So, you know, you've got to look for these little side benefits. But the water, clean running water is a must, especially for cattle. Sheep can handle a couple of days without rain, without water on New England country, no trouble at all. But with cattle, you've got to have running water, and it's got to be oxygenated. You know, the more it flows, the more it's oxygenated, the sweeter the water, the better it is for your stock. And the other thing with the Himalayan salt, this is a little kick off here. The bits that are left that the stock don't eat, I just put in the trough, and then it dissolves and they get their minerals through the water. So that's just a little bonus of having, you can't do that in a dam, but you can do that with a water trough. But it's small money, it's really small compared, you know, and the benefits, you don't have the evaporation, you haven't got dirty water. There's nothing worse than seeing cattle driving past, seeing cattle up to their bellies in muddy water. That is a recipe for poor economics, apart from the animal welfare side to it. It doesn't wash very well. So it's a simple way out. Don't worry about the expense. And as far as the monitoring the water, there's a product which I use called U/SEE. You can get that from Central Queensland. I'm sure Terry McCloskey would know a bit about it. And you put that on the tank, and it reads to the satellite, and I can look up my iPhone and see today what level the water's at. So there's modern technology out there today which can show you, and it's solar pumped as well on a pressure valve, so the water's constantly at a level. And so all that is, you know, the technology of today is really beneficial for us, and so it's not that difficult.
The word dams was mentioned. One of the things I learned at visit to Peter's place years ago, dams are a no-no in nature. Nature didn't have dams. Nature had leaky weirs. And even at that time, there were people at that gathering that were re-engineering their dams to make them leak. Now, I've never been brave enough to do that, but it makes environmental sense. So if you really believe in having in-ground water under the floodplain, along the drainage lines, you don't have dams, okay? So I'll just throw that in because it's worth thinking about.
You know, this whole question of water's really got to be gripped. Do you realise that if you take this room as a map of Australia and 100 drops of rain fall on it in a given year, 50 of those drops of rain, when they hit the soil, are going straight back up there because they can't get into the soil to create the under the ground soil sponge, water sponge that the various speakers have been speaking about. So, and that gets back to soil carbon levels. When you lose the soil carbon, you lose the capacity to hold that extra 8 grams of water per gram of soil. That gets back to the measuring of soil carbon. But until we understand how much water we are losing, not just to run off on houses and streets and so on, but off our properties, because the water can't get into the soil, we're going to take a hiding. What we've got to be able to do is to capture every single drop of rain that falls on this landscape, and every single drop of rain has got to be looked upon as liquid gold. And until that gets right into the mentality of all of us, farmers, urbanites, kids and so on, we'll continue to lose that thing and fiddle around with reallocating water out of the Murray or whatever the trivial things are discussed instead of getting to the core issue.
Can someone further explain the saying, understocked but overgrazed?
Understocked and overgrazed is what you probably see a lot around here. It usually comes from set stocking. And I'll go back again to those 3 grasses we had in phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3. If you leave animals in a paddock, they will go and visit the choicest plants first. Does that make sense? And then they'll visit the next choicest plants and the next choicest plants and go through through the range. Now, after about 10, 14 days, that first plant has become fresh again, so it then becomes the next choicest plant. So they've left a lot of plants out there that they haven't touched. They'll go back to that choicest plant and then go through that whole thing again with the first their first graze. Now, what happens then over time is that you'll end up with very, very short grass and long, tall, stalky grass. Neither are good for the environment or the ecology, and neither are good for your stock. So all the short grass, it isn't photosynthesising. All its energy is coming from the roots, taking away from the microbes, and they're also going to end up killing that plant. All those tall grasses have gone into phase 3, so they've lignified. Now, when a plant lignifies, the intake of the animal, it can only intake half the amount of a lignified plant than of a good cellulose plant, and the nutrient value of that plant is half. So it's a double whammy. And so when you go and drive home, you will see a lot of paddocks with very, very short grass with long grass amongst it, and that's understocked and overgrazed.
That's a easy way to look at it. But as time goes on, and I was just amazed how much extra grass I've got, not just in bulk, but in species. So this is what we call succession, and we've moved from one landscape to the next. And so as the summer grass is dying off, the cool season perennials are coming up, and this is true biodiversity within a native pasture. which a lot of people don't realise, but we've been blessed because my father didn't plough it all out or spray it or whatever, so the seed was there. All I had to do was activate the land and get the organic matter there, and boof, up it's come. And so I manage through a landscape, slightly different to what Matt's talking about, that does have long grass and short grass, because I'm managing for the range of species. And that's the area which I concentrate on, not just individual, but so that we do have seed heads and we do have short, and then I'll adjust the stocking rate to get the maximum return from that.
That stock, set stock is your over.
That's right, yeah.
So the rest.
The rest is the tool which allows that to happen.
How damaging to the gut and well-being of a sheep is drenching? I'm going to ask a few questions together. It's all the same person. If soil is deficient in nutrients, is mineral supplementation a good idea? And will this help correct soil deficiencies over time? And how does superphosphate damage the mycorrhizal fungi? How damaging to the gut of the sheep is drenching?
I haven't done any research on this, Shell, but just when we first started changing the microbiome on the sheep and took out grain and drenching, we had them on a free choice mineral system to start with. So that assisted the animals to boost their health and deal with that transition. And at the same time, I guess the whole concept was that their manure then was appropriately balanced too with the minerals, because they were able to select what they required depending on the environment they were within. But yeah, the only thing I can say is some of the manure you might see from animals that are either grain fed or drenched quite often doesn't break down readily. It's not obviously not exciting food for the soil microbes to break it down. So if you've got manure sitting around paddocks for years, it's a pretty good sign that it's not right. What was the other question?
So the other one is supplementation. Is it a good idea? If soil is deficient in nutrients, is mineral supplementation a good idea?
We found that whilst we started that with the free choice mineral system, it didn't take long before they weren't taking those minerals anymore. They didn't require it anymore once you got the soil functioning correctly and the animal's microbiome correct. So it may be a short-term thing, but then once you've got the whole biological system under the soil working for you, those microbes will be accessing nutrients from all sorts of directions, and getting that into the foodstuffs that the animals are eating. And I guess too, the opportunity for them to have access to a variety of things, whether it be grasses or shrubs or browse or whatever it is, enabling that within your system as best possible.
It relates back to, the way I see it, to your grazing plan. And the longer you rest, you can break the cycle. And by having cattle in front of sheep, we've broken the cycle, which depends on how you want to do it. But by doing that, the livestock are healthier. I supply the Himalayan salt, so they get their minerals that way, and it's ad lib all year round, and it's very, very cost effective. So it's up to the individual how they do that. But in our situation, a lot of people on the Northern Tablelands are drenching every 4 weeks, every month, 3 to 4 weeks, and a lot of them gone out of sheep because they're drenching so often. So that is a band-aid, a massive band-aid. In our case, I do it twice a year, and I'd like to say none. I did go 4 years with weathers one year, but then we had a downpour of rain in February, and up came the barber's pole, bang. And before I knew it, I had to go and drench those sheep, which was very frustrating, but at the same time, I was aware of it, and I had to do that. So I just drench twice a year with 2 different chemical bases, long-acting, and that covers me.
Healthy soils, healthy plants, healthy animals. And I think the more diversity you have in your pastures, the better balanced diet over a 12-month period you'll have with your animals. And certainly some of the information we've collected is the animal health costs are, a third of the cost, or far less, through the regenerative graziers than the great unwashed. Far less. So when the animals are healthy, the requirements for these treatments are far less too.
We are growing, not me personally, 6 tonnes per hectare of wheat in Riverina. Can we do this with regenerative ag practices? Can do better than that. Is that who sent me that question? Was that dry land or irrigated? Dry land. Thank you. There we go.
It probably doesn't really matter whether it's dry land or irrigated. Yeah, of course you can do it with regenerative agriculture. I've got country there that we took on a farm down at Dower, and it was with a friend of mine who was a property developer, and he ended up with this 4,000 acres of a real crap farm. And he twisted my arm and said, let's come and do something with this farm. This farm had been cropped to continuous cereal for 8 years in a row. It had just totally uncontrollable weeds like ryegrass, radish, brome grass all through it. So we took it on as a 4,000 acre experiment, and we continuously cropped that to cereal for another 8 years, I think it was, after that, continuous cereal. And but in amongst that continuous, we had a sheep phase running through it as well. So the livestock was a major part of that. And by the time we moved that property on, yeah, we were growing up to 5 tonnes in a good year of cereal crops with no weeds, what to think of. You know, they were good, clean crops. And that was just by adding biology, by just keeping biology and diversity of biology up all the time. And I think what you'll find is as you transition, you know, everyone, the cropping is the big ogre for everyone. I find the livestock fairly easily, but when it's the cropping system and you're on a driven system, you know, all that I suggest is that you start backing off one and introducing the other, and you just keep doing it more and more and more until you find out that you end up dropping those synthetics out. And you find when you get to that, and even you get to that magical figure of no more than 5 units of N in any one application, preferably in any 1 year, you see a massive leap. It's a bit like that carbon level. When you get to a certain level, you see things jump up. So if I take on a farm now, I go cold turkey. I go from, if it was straight synthetic, I just go straight biological. But I'm pretty confident in what we're doing. We've got the right intent for what we're doing, so it works. We put everything out there. But if you want to be safe, you just, and that's for your own mental sake, you just slowly take down one and introduce the other. But whenever you're putting biology on, put on as the maximum diversity that you can. So, you know, and yeah, that's pretty simple to do. The key to us was getting the animals onto those paddocks as much as possible. Like the air seed is pushing the animals out of the way as it's seeding. You know, the animals are following the harvester in, and when the crop's 3-leaf, the animals are in there as well. And so they're on and off, so as much animal impact as you can, and finally pull them off, let the crop grow and harvest it.
Look, can I just also add to that? Now, of course, yes, we can. We now have GPS sort of performance data as header goes around and harvest. And actually, if you look most of that, there'll be patches of most paddocks that are doing up to 10 times better than other patches. Same soil, same climate, same crop, same treatment. The difference is those soil health, that soil biology impeding, limiting that crop performance. So basically there's no reason why, 90% of that paddock shouldn't be operating at that optimum rather than 10%. And there's your whole yield dividend. But the bottom line is it's not, you know, am I doing 8 tonnes or 10 tonnes or whatever? Are you doing better than before? Is it more resilient than before? And for that system that you're in, are you coming to the top of the curve and meeting those sort of basically performance and health values that basically we talked about?
Was there a cost difference in
what
doing
Charlie
it regeneratively?
He's dead right. You know, you don't look at tonnes in the bin, you look at dollars in the bank. And you've really got to look at that equation as just, you know, sometimes you can make more money out of a 3-tonne crop than a 6-tonne crop, and that's what it gets to. And plus, build your ecological system. And you've got to be happy with that, because then what you find is you reach that tipping point upwards as well, because once you build that ecological system, then your yield is no limit either, and you've got both ends of the scale working for you. So that's where you've got to look at it. And you'll find instantly as you start building that and getting those plants functioning, and they have that right root mycorrhizal relationship in the soil, everything will start to work for you, and you're not having to use the fungicides and insecticides. You know, you've got brixes of 25 in a wheat crop and things like that, and it all works for you.
Just there are farmers in Queensland with dryland biological practices growing phenomenal crops, and some horticultural guys in Tassie that have irrigation and dryland growing vegetables under full biological systems and having phenomenal results and with amazing yields. So yeah, it's just a matter of a bit of creativity in your own property and making it work, but there is some amazing stuff out there.
And don't forget risk either. You know, risk is such a big thing in those seasons where 9 out of 13 may be less favourable. I know which system will come ahead in the long run.
I think we'll draw the questions to a close there. Not that there wasn't some more good questions. We had questions around branding, regen ag, and how we go forward with that, measuring carbon, and just big questions that we'll continue to discuss. And I'm sorry we don't have time to answer those right now. But I just hope that you took the time to make some notes, and that's helpful and gives you walk away actually going, yeah, I did, there's a whole lot of things that have gone through our mind, but, I did promise myself I'd look into that more, or this course or that challenge. But I just want to take this time to thank everyone, and thank you all so much for helping us at NutriSoil to realise this dream. So bringing all these awesome leaders in the audience as well in regenerative agriculture together is part of that. But the other part of the dream is making an impact. That means people going away inspired and with ideas on how to go forward in this new agriculture, to equip ourselves to be leaders, to carry on learning and building from the collective knowledge and experiences in the room, and to be the change you want to see in agriculture. We need to create and build our community so we're no longer isolated or feeling ostracised. We need to know that we are part of something bigger than ourselves, something that has real momentum and can only succeed if we connect with and support it. So welcome to the tribe, and you can look forward to the camaraderie that comes with it. Thank you again, and congratulations on being part of a monumental day. And if you're going home, safe travels. Otherwise, enjoy your time now networking.